Hello, BookTube. I've got a review for you today, for you comic book fans and you Conan the Barbarian fans, of an item that brings those two things together. This is the Savage Sword of Conan #1 by Titan Books and Heroic Signatures. And it is an adjunct Conan comic book put out by Titan in addition to their monthly 4-color Conan comic book, Conan the Barbarian. This is slightly larger than Conan the Barbarian and is in black and white, not in color. This mirrors a plan for publishing Conan that happened 50 years ago when Marvel Comics first had the franchise to this character, for Robert E. Howard's characters, Conan and Kull and Solomon Kane, which was that Marvel brought out Conan the Barbarian, a 4-color comic book. It did well enough, so that Stan Lee and Roy Thomas thought about bringing out a companion, a magazine, in black and white, but that would be for the newsstand rather than the comics rack, and that would be free from the moral scriptures of the Comics Code Authority, and so could be more gory, more sexually explicit, pricier. And so they invented a thing called Savage Sword of Conan. I was a fan back then of Conan the Barbarian, and I was going to become a much bigger fan, and I heard the news that the old Savage Tales was going to become Savage Sword of Conan, and was on board, and I was not prepared for how great that first year or two of Marvel's original Savage Sword of Conan was. Just fantastic. Some of the best Conan stories ever put on a comic book page. And Marvel had that franchise for a long time. Conan the Barbarian, the 4-color comic book, ran for a long time. So did Savage Sword of Conan for hundreds of issues. And then Marvel lost that franchise, and it went elsewhere. And then years and years and years later, Marvel got that franchise back. They got the Conan franchise back. And they started publishing Conan the Barbarian and also Savage Sword of Conan. But the second time around, Marvel's Savage Sword of Conan was a 4-color comic book in the exact same size and aspect ratio as Conan the Barbarian. You were just getting 2 Conan stories a month. But there wasn't any tonal difference, and there certainly wasn't any black and white. They were both just color comics. And I was a little nostalgic for the original Marvel Savage Sword of Conan, but in the first few runs of both Marvel's second Conan the Barbarian and Marvel's second Savage Sword of Conan, the stories and the artwork were top-notch. So I was a little bit nostalgic, but I wasn't complaining. It was just, I adjusted to having Savage Sword of Conan be just a second Conan comic. And then Marvel lost the franchise again, and it went to Titan Books and Heroic Signatures, which oversees the whole thing. And Titan Books started coming out with Conan the Barbarian, a 4-color normal comic book. And I was leery for 2 reasons. I was leery for 2 reasons that are endemic in reviewing any comic book in the 21st century, but especially any comic book by any superhero or superhero adjacent type of concern. So DC Comics, the home of real superheroes like Superman and Wonder Woman, or Marvel Comics, the home of Freudian superheroes like Spider-Man or Wolverine, or other comics, Dark Horse to a limited extent, Titan Books to a limited extent. There are 2 reasons, mainly stemming from around 2014, 2015, turbocharging in 2016. I wonder why. And those 2 reasons that you have to suddenly watch out for are twice as many as once upon a time you had to think about when you were reviewing a comic book. I've reviewed 1 million comic books in my career. And from time immemorial, the only thing I had to worry about was technical execution. So there's a new creative team on the Avengers or the Justice League. Okay. What is that like? What is that? How is the technical execution? In other words, how is the writing? How is the artwork? How is the inking? How's the lettering? And maybe how's the editing if there's a question of continuity problems? Down here. That was the only thing you had to think about, of course. That was the only thing you had to think about. And as a critic, you would go at a new comic and you would review it on those axes. How good those things were or how bad they were. Whether or not Herb Trimpe was involved, in other words. Since you knew I was going to work his name in. Since roughly 2014, 2015, turbocharged in 2016, there is another element. Now there are 2 things that you have to go into any 4-color superhero comic book, and for the purposes of this discussion, we'll call Conan a superhero comic book, worried about. wondering about, on your guard against. One is still technical matters, technical competence, or in the case of 21st century comic books, technical incompetence, where you are reading along and you see ordinary English words misspelled, or you're turning the pages and you're noticing that it's not just the Outsiders or the new Teen Titans or some iteration of Carol Danvers and her sidekick Avengers, that it's every comic has really bad artwork that's not only done by computer but done by a bad computer. It's not just that you have to look for anymore, though. In addition to technical incompetence, there's also ideological capture. Because in those years, since 2010, 2014, 2016 especially, the two major comic book companies have been ideologically captured by a weird, zealous splinter of the alt-left, of the far left on the ideological spectrum. More so in Marvel than DC, I would say, but the point of an ideological capture is that it's not just, Shirley at the end desk on the right. It's everybody, and it's corporate policy. That's what it means to be ideologically captured, rather than simply housing a zealot that you either know about or don't know about. If you're ideologically captured, that means the ideology is driving the show. Not artwork, not characters, not continuity, and most of all, not the customer. Because when it comes to superhero comic books, and again, for the purposes of this video, we'll call Conan a superhero comic book, a good solid 70% of your audience are the people that this far-left ideology absolutely, viscerally hates. They consider them to be, say it with me now, literally worse than Hitler. And that is cis-het white men. This ideology is now something that you have to look out for, and you don't even have to look far. It utterly governs the entire superhero lineup of the two major superhero companies, with the sole exceptions of their two live wire moneymakers, Batman for DC, Spider-Man for Marvel Comics. Other than that, everywhere, and inroads in both of those as well. There's never been a less effective, more effete, more prancing Spider-Man than the one who is currently in his own books right now. And there's a difference between Batman being a psychologically driven creature of the night and him being a psychologically damaged individual who belongs in an institution getting heavy doses of medication, not out on the streets of Gotham punching the Penguin. Guess which of those you're getting in DC these days? But, totally in those cases, but also anywhere else you go, you have to be on your guard against simply being exposed to propaganda. Just propaganda. And that propaganda will have several key tenets to it. They're very predictable because the zealots who do this sort of thing, the zealots who co-opt, they infest and co-opt some sort of IP, whatever it is, they don't care about the IP. Absolutely. The only thing they care about is themselves. They don't care about the IP at all. When they do this, they only have a handful of ideological tenets. It's not like this is very complex. They hate men, as a matter of course. And that will be reflected in something that is referred to over and over again. It's now mocked. It's now referred to mockingly as thwarting the male gaze, which means that you will make everything ugly, especially women. Not because you want ugly characters to be in comic books, but because you want men to not enjoy the experience of reading a comic book. You don't want them seeing anything they like, because they're all rapists. Whatever the ideology says. I've never actually gone to the bother of getting to the bottom of thwarting the male gaze. What the possible reason there could be for that. Another one that I'm sure you've heard in connection with pop culture and so-called culture wars in the last 10 years is subverting expectations, which is code speak for telling bad stories, for pissing off your core audience. That's what you do when you are subverting expectations. You are intentionally trying to anger the people who are paying your bills. It's otherwise known in the industry as fan baiting, where you figure, well, since we don't want their loyalty, but we do want their business, we'll anger them so much that they'll buy our books. We can't please them anymore into buying our books, but maybe if we anger them, we'll get that same result. That doesn't work. Fan baiting doesn't work. The fans go away, and they don't come back. And as a result of those things, the comic book industry has been cratered. A huge portion of the core audience has been driven away. And the reason I'm opening with this is because those were my worries when Titan Comics launched Conan the Barbarian, their 4-color Conan comic book. I was naturally worried because that is now the overwhelming rule rather than the weird exception. That it is unbelievably rare to find a comic book, a 4-color superhero comic book, that is not completely ideologically captured, that is not immediately going to start propounding an ideology, putting forward propaganda, rather than trying in any way to entertain you, even remotely caring about entertaining you. All these ideologues want, as they say over and over again in their social media, is, quote unquote, to piss off the right people. That's all they want. The furthest thing in the world from them to entertain any reader. Many, many of them have gone on social media sneeringly saying things like, well, if I have to do the POW and Kazam stuff in order to get the message across, I'll do that. Just dripping with contempt for people who've been reading and liking these things longer than they've been alive. Sometimes, in present company included, longer than their parents have been alive. We must all be racist simpletons. So naturally, I was leery when I saw Titan launch a new comic, because after the initial runs on Marvel's second bite at the apple of Conan the Barbarian, the ideology took over and ruined the whole thing, just drove it into the ground. I was worried that Titan Comics would cut out the middleman and just start that way, just start ideologically captured. The reason why you would worry about this, the main reason why you would worry about this with Conan, is because Conan the Barbarian, created by Robert E. Howard a century ago, is a massive trophy for the ideologues who infest these type of comics. They look for trophies. They don't care about these characters at all. They look for trophies, things they can subvert, things they can thwart, things they want to take things that the cishet white men, the older cishet white men who read these comics, they want to take things they really love and turn them into things that they think those guys hate. Those guys don't hate those things. Those guys have best friends that tick every one of those boxes, sit right next to them at the bar every Friday. They don't hate those things. What they hate is the contempt involved in manipulating their beloved heroes in order to make an ideological point. That's what they hate. They've been very clear about hating that all along, and I hate it too. In this circumstance, I am, like most of you, I would imagine, caught between the alt-left and the alt-right. The guys who hate women characters because they're women, I no more want to associate with than the weirdos with blue hair and who are on Twitter 12 hours a day who want to thwart the male gaze or subvert expectations. I don't want anything to do with either one of them. So I was pleasantly surprised by the initial run of Conan the Barbarian for Titan Comics. It was written by Jim Zub. And there was none of that. Instead, it was largely terrific stuff. And I reread it recently for Epic Comic Book Wednesday on this channel and liked it even more. And I had learned since then that Titan Comics was also going to come out with their own version of Savage Sword of Conan. And unlike Marvel in their second run, it was going to be an oversized black and white magazine. No need to worry anymore about the Comics Code Authority. The level of violence and sexual explicitness isn't going to be that much different. I think I noticed a couple of instances in this first issue. But I was intrigued. Of course, I was intrigued, especially when I learned that in addition to changing the format, Titan Books was also going to bring back the original idea of Roy Thomas's Savage Sword of Conan from 50 years ago, which is that it's a kind of an anthology thing. It's not a regular 4-color monthly comic book telling a monthly story. Instead, you will get multi-part stories. You'll get pin-ups by different artists. You'll get essays. Oh, those original, 50 years ago, those original issues of Savage Sword of Conan, they are full of stuff. Full. It would take you an hour in an afternoon in Iowa to read them, to read one from the beginning to end. Delightfully so. I learned that Titan was going to do that under the imprimatur of Heroic Signatures, and I was intrigued. Once I learned that it was actually going to happen, I was intrigued. So I got issue number 1, which does indeed do that. It is indeed a kind of anthology issue. It's not at all like Titan Comics' Conan the Barbarian. I got an alternate cover. The main cover is by Joe Jusko, but this was the only one that I had access to. I definitely wanted this thing in physical format. I could download the digital copy easily with any cover that I want, but I wanted this in physical format because I have every first issue of Savage Sword of Conan in physical format, so it felt like a tradition. I got a weird alternate cover. This is frankly bad, right? I mean, it's a crotch shot of a T-Rex. And Conan is just standing there. He's not alarmed or alert. He's just standing there. Why is he just standing there? Why isn't he ready to face this thing? Why isn't he seeking cover or raising his weapon or anything like that? So it's an odd cover. It's kind of bad, but it was the only option that I had. And I read it. And I want to give you a review of it, but that review will be a little uneven because this is a hodgepodge. It's an anthology work. And any anthology work, no matter how good it is, even those old Roy Thomas issues, will have strengths and weaknesses. I confess that because of that 4-issue original one by Jim Zub on Conan the Barbarian for Titan Comics, my guard was down. I confess that when I went into this, I wasn't really thinking about either of those two things that you have to think about now with modern comics: technical incompetence and ideology. I wasn't really thinking about either of those, and I should have been. Because I knew from reading about this online that Jim Zub only does one thing in the issue. The rest of it is done by other people. I'll hold this up for you. You can see it. The rest of it is done by other people. And I was going to say you don't know what you'll get, but in fact, in the modern era, you do know what you'll get. And that's exactly what I got for a lot of this issue. So rather than let this turn into a massive rant, which I don't particularly want it to do, let's talk about the good parts and the bad parts of the Savage Sword of Conan #1 from Titan Comics. There was no YouTube. I was not around YouTube. There was no platform like this for me to do Marvel Comics Savage Sword of Conan #1, either of them. But now we can talk about this. So let's start with the good things. And the first good thing is meta. It's 30,000 foot consideration, which is that, as odd as it sounds, regardless of execution, it is wonderful to have a Savage Sword of Conan out in the world again. A Savage Sword of Conan that is the Savage Sword of Conan, that is oversized, that is black and white, that is an anthology thing with many different things to consider in it. That is wonderful to have. Hats off to the people at Titan Comics for pushing forward with that idea. That's good thing #1. We can do some other good things. There's a foreword here by Roy Thomas. This issue has a foreword by Roy Thomas. Anytime you can have Roy Thomas writing about Conan, I am pleased. It's a wonderful thing that they did that. The issue, it begins and ends with two wonderful old dinosaurs. It begins with Roy Thomas writing an issue about introducing the first issue of another Savage Sword of Conan when he introduced the first one all those years ago. And it ends with a pinup of artwork by Howard Chaykin. So you've got the tacit seal of approval from giants in the field, which is great. That's good. This issue, the main contents here is the big cover story of Conan and a backup story that is part 1 of a multi-part adventure of Solomon Kane. That story is drawn and written by Patrick Zurcher. And it features, I guess we'll show them to you. It features Robert E. Howard's Puritan swashbuckler Solomon Kane. As you can see, he is not set in barbaric times. He is set in 17th century England and parts thereof. He wears the hat, he has a pistol, he has a rapier, he dresses in black, he is a Puritan. And I have always found Solomon Kane a little silly. He's got the buckle on the hat, and I maintain that the dude bros that love this character and talk about him endlessly only do so because of the hat. And that if he wore a sombrero, they wouldn't care about him at all. However, there is a way to do Solomon Kane well. I maintain, a little bit heretically, that Robert E. Howard never quite managed to do Solomon Kane well, but some writers have. The way to do Solomon Kane well is to emphasize the aspect that connects him with Robert E. Howard's other two great characters. Conan and Kull. Both are separated from each other by thousands of years. But and it's harder to do in Solomon Kane's case because he lives in a so-called civilized era. In an era where he's probably not going to be encountering dinosaurs on every page or wizards or anything like that. Where it's going to have to be more subdued. There's gunpowder. There's the beginnings of science. That key element is danger. All three of those characters have an appearance on the surface that looks dangerous. And all three of those characters are, in fact, 10 times more dangerous even than their dangerous appearance makes them seem. Solomon Kane at heart, the way to get to a great Solomon Kane story is that at heart, underneath his manners and his book learning and his piety, Solomon Kane at heart is every bit as over-the-top barbarically dangerous as Conan or King Kull. And Zurcher actually manages to give little tremors of that in here. And also does a terrific job with the menace, which is it has elements of Beowulf. It has elements of Grendel. It's a dark countryside monster that it even goes so far as to have a name like Grendel and to refer to the text refers to the character that way by that name. This is a connected. It's part one of a story, but it's well done. It has a couple of flaws, just a few. Unbelievably, considering that this is me talking, I didn't consider Solomon Kane to be a flaw in this story. I think Patrick Zurcher gets him. He is quiet. He is introspective. He is courteous. He is not a thief, a reaver, and a slayer. He is not a crowned king, a barbarian from nowhere. He has the veneer of civilization, and the key to Solomon Kane, the key to writing a good story, is to play that off against what he's really like in his essence, which is extremely deadly. And it's great that Zurcher gets that and seems to add that to the atmosphere of the story. So the characters might misjudge Solomon Kane at first. He is by far the easiest Robert E. Howard character to misjudge. They might misjudge him at first, and then suddenly they realize, oh, why are all the hairs on the back of my neck standing up? That's terrific. That's what you want from a Solomon Kane story. No, my main problem here was that, is going to come up again in this video, is that the artwork, although very good for blacks and shades of gray, is obviously very photo heavy. It's very photo reliant. In ways that I don't know. I guess they're common now. I won't call it technical incompetence because it's absolutely universal in the comic book world today. Except in De La Torre's artwork on those 4 issues of Conan the Barbarian, where he just learned to draw people instead of learning to trace pictures. That bothers me a little, but it didn't interrupt the story at all. The story was actually quite good. It's exactly the kind of the setup anyway of the story. The story goes on, but the setup is exactly the kind of Solomon Kane story that I most want, which is him in little taverns, in rainy burrows, far out in the countryside, facing something that's the last remnant of its kind, something that's quasi-normal, quasi-paranormal, that where it will be not so much random chance as that this is one of the key to Solomon Kane is that he is facing some of the last instances where you would need someone like Conan or Kull. He's facing some of the last instances where it's going to come down to his raw heroism, to his raw power as the hero. Before the modern world that Robert E. Howard hated so much takes over completely. Although Howard managed to work in glimmers of that in later stories as well, the detectives and boxers and whatnot. But Solomon Kane is the last flourish of that. And I thought Zurcher's story did that well. The Zurcher story is called Master of the Hunt, and it's part 1 here. So I could theoretically look forward to a part 2. Another strong point of this issue is prose. It's Jeffrey Shanks writing about Solomon Kane. He writes an essay about Solomon Kane's origins in the Robert E. Howard legendarium, about his a little bit of his fan reception, a little bit of what Howard thought of him and how that thought changed. A pretty good essay. Standard stuff in Roy Thomas's old Savage Sword of Conan 50 years ago. You got a lot of essays like that, including quite a few on Solomon Kane. But who's going to find those issues? Who's going to go and get them? So it's good to have it again, and it was very competently done. And the other really good thing in this issue, aside from those little bits and pieces, seeing Roy Thomas again, anytime you see Howard Chaykin's artwork, always a thrill for me. Aside from those two things, the best thing in this issue, actually better than the other two that I've mentioned, the best thing in this issue is also prose. There's a short story in here called Sacrifice in the Sand, which is written by Jim Zub, the writer of Conan the Barbarian for Titan Comics. And it's terrific. It's partially, I think, a semi-playful homage to how over-the-top Robert E. Howard's own prose could be, but in an effective way, in a clearly affectionate way. I thought it was terrific. I really enjoyed it. It was the highlight of the issue for me. Now, if that is our list of the good parts of this issue, then I bet you can guess where all the bad parts are, because there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and that is the marquee story. The main cover story of this issue. It's called Conan and the Dragon Horde. It's written by John Arcudi with artwork by Max von Fafner. I've never heard of the name Max von Fafner before, and I would not be surprised at all to learn that it was not only a pseudonym, but a pseudonym for an algorithm. This is a Conan comic. The main story in this Conan comic, I never for a minute believed that it was created by a human being. If it was done by a human being, it was not drawn. It was assembled in various computer programs, and I'll show you examples of that. And unfortunately, Conan and the Dragon Horde is all of the negatives in this issue, and it's the title marquee thing. So it was pretty hard to ignore. Where to start with the annoyances? Okay, well, I guess we can stick, so that I don't rant, we can stick to the two criteria that I mentioned already. Technical incompetence and ideology. Those are what I now have to be on my guard against. Even now, in Conan is appearing in Titan Comics, I now have to be on my guard. I know now that there are ideological zealots working for Titan Comics. In that first run of Conan the Barbarian, I saw no hint of it, and so I could imagine that maybe they weren't there. Now I know they are there. And that's really, really bad, because there's no way to negotiate with them, and there's no way to work around them. I have said this before many, many times in many, many different areas, whether it's a business, a sports franchise, academia, a high school, a comic book company, no matter where it is, the only way you can deal with far-left, alt-left ideologues in your personnel is to fire them and walk them out of the building. There is no way to contain them. There is no way to cooperate with them. There's no way to give a little and take a little. They have to be gone. They have to be gone from the system. There is no more an ability to live with them in your company than there is the ability to live with pancreatic cancer in your body. It needs to be cut out. They need to be gone. So now that I know that they're there, then I know that sooner or later they will be in charge. And so we're looking for those two things, technical incompetence and ideology. And the technical incompetence can be small or large. And the ideology will be very, very predictable. You will thwart the male gaze. You will subvert expectations. Men will be evil or incompetent or both, but they will never, ever be good and competent. Never. Well, what does that do to a character like Conan? Conan is perhaps the most politically incorrect popular culture character of them all. In other words, in parentheses, he would be the biggest trophy. The biggest trophies, the two biggest trophies, are off limits. Superman and Batman cannot be gay or BIPOC or neurodivergent any more than Batman already is. They can't be that. They are untouchable. You can make all of Batman's sidekicks as warped or weird or ideologically driven as you want. DC won't raise a finger against you. You can take Superman's biological son, age him up to age 18, make him incredibly gay, and call him Superman so that you can tell your vengeful allies on Twitter that you made Superman gay, but you can't make Clark Kent gay. So Conan would be a pretty big trophy. Conan is a thief, a reaver, and a slayer. He's a towering, brooding Cimmerian from the north. He is a barbarian walking into the more or less civilized kingdoms of his era. He is unbeatable, physically, against mortal people, against ordinary armed adversaries. He is a one-on-one especially, but even 10-on-1. You're always safe money on him. In the extended Marvel Comics Conan world, Roy Thomas reconceived a name from a Robert E. Howard story and made a character called Red Sonja, who is Conan's equal with a sword. But because she made a bargain with a goddess, the goddess will make her unbeatable, provided she remains true to that goddess. Other than that, Conan is probably 4 to 5 times stronger and faster than any other person in his world, especially any other woman. So if you are, I don't even know, the latest, knife-wielding, trash-talking, talk about my food a lot, young, tiny, 5-foot-tall female character, and you are facing Conan, you are basically facing a silverback mountain gorilla. You have no chance of winning, and yet in the final issues of Marvel Comics' second run of Conan, those women were not only easily trash-talking and handling him, but they were also, in a key moment, saving him. So you have to watch out for that. You have to watch out for both of those things in this issue, and they're there. They're there in massive amounts. Both the technical incompetence and the ideology are all over Conan and the Dragon Horde. We'll start with the smallest error, the smallest bit of technical incompetence. Something I have brought up many times before. I did not encounter it in the Titan books, Conan the Barbarian, but here it is, big as life, in Conan, the Savage Sword of Conan for Titan books. And that is simply an error. When we are learning about the Conan stories, the framing device that Robert E. Howard introduced and that Roy Thomas institutionalized for 10 years in Marvel Comics, that a million novels and short stories have institutionalized, when we are learning about Conan's adventures, we are learning about them through something called the Nemedian Chronicles. Conan is already a figure in history for us. We are reading about him in the Nemedian Chronicles. And the Nemedian Chronicles are a chronicle that were assembled and are being read to a prince. We never learn the prince's name. But it starts off with an address to the prince. Know, O Prince. Since that is the vocative, the O is a capital O all by itself. It is not the word O-O-H. It is not that word. That is simply a mistake. And there it is, big as life, right at the beginning of the first issue of Titan Comics' Savage Sword of Conan. No O Prince. And the reason this works me up is twofold. One is because Marvel Comics in their second run of Conan the Barbarian did that. They'd made that same mistake. No O Prince, O-H. And they got flooded with letters and emails from fans saying, liked or didn't like the issue, good things and bad things. Oh, and also, there's an error. At the beginning of every issue that you're doing, there's an error. You need to change that error. You need to fix that mistake. And the folks at Marvel Comics said, we're pissing off the right people. They said, it's cishet white quasi-Nazis who are pointing this out, and so we will proudly keep making this error. We will proudly keep doing this. Marvel kept that error in their Conan comics all the way to the end. And here it is in Savage Sword of Conan. And since I now know that there are alt-left ideologues at Titan Comics, for all I know, they're looking at that and saying, well, we're not going to give the man-babies everything they want. We need to start changing them because they need to be better. We need to try and drag them onto the right side of history because we're all Harriet Tubman. We're all Martin Luther King Jr. We're crusading for ideology. We're not writing a comic book. We don't want to entertain these people. We want to make their morals better. So we're going to make that error because it bothers them. And if it bothers them, maybe they'll rethink their worldview. We'll see. It could be that this is simply a mistake. It could be that this is not the second thing that we're looking for, but the first thing, just technical incompetence. And that it will be corrected. I doubt it very much. I think probably the next 2 issues, at least the next 1 issue of this comic is already done. I'd be willing to bet you a Boston cream pie that mistake will still be in there. And when those ideologues at Titan Comics say that, I want to say to them, okay, if you don't want to listen to the cishet white guys who are buying this thing, no one else is. No one else is. Your phantom audience does not exist. None of your fellow ideologues are buying this. I'm buying this. Conan fans are buying this. If you don't want to listen to us because you hate us, even though you took a job writing a Conan magazine, you hate Conan fans. All right, fine. How about listening to your boss? If you won't listen to me, how about you listen to Heroic Signatures? Why don't you go to their website? It's, Conan.com. Why don't you go to their website and see how they write that introduction? How they write the Nemedian Chronicles? Let me give you a little hint. They don't make your mistake. And I don't think they'd like that you're making it. Especially if they get the impression that you're making it willingly, that you know you're doing it. But I said that was a little mistake. I said that was a little thing. The big things go on from there. We get a De La Torre pinup. Just fantastic. Just incredible. But then we get the story. We get the main story. And right away, before you even get to the story, you get to a map. A big map of the Hyborian Age. And see right away one of the biggest technical incompetencies of Savage Sword of Conan #1. This is done on newsprint paper in black and white. That's a different kind of technology from color comic books. Which means you have to know what you're doing, or it's going to look terrible. What is this? What is this? So the first time I saw this, I thought, okay, so somebody did a really detailed map of the Hyborian Age. They drew it all out on an easel, on an artboard. And then the person who made this walked into that artist's studio, crumpled up that map, ate it, waited a day, crapped it out, and photocopied the results. This looks like vomit. What is this? Before I even got to the artwork of the issue, I was thinking, okay, so you knew you were making a black and white comic and you didn't bother to prove to yourself that you knew how to do that? You didn't bother to make sure that you knew that? And it turns out that is the tone of the whole thing. The artwork, what little you can see of it, is terrible. Look at this. This is the opening pinup. Can you make that out? What is all this? What is all this down here? What on earth? Here is the opening page. What's all this? What are these things? I think these might be elephants, even though the tusks are much too long, and I don't know what these things are. But what are all these dark shadows? Are these the bad guys? Are these like ring wraiths? No. It's just poor color grading. That's all. It's poor grayscale grading. And it goes on throughout the issue. Here's our first introduction to Conan. Look at that murky mess. That is a murky mess. In addition to being technically incompetent, why is Conan riding a children's circus pony? His feet are virtually touching the ground. Why is this horse so small? Is it because the artist, if von Fafner is a real person, was thinking, well, I want to emphasize Conan? Well, then maybe you do your framing and paneling so as to emphasize Conan, rather than simply drawing a miniature horse. This is the kind of embarrassing technical incompetence that now absolutely speaks for Marvel and DC Comics. But the story is that Conan is leading a cavalry regiment in the retinue of an exiled prince who is leading an army back to his home city, presumably to besiege it and retake control of it. The guy's money seems to be good, so Conan is on board. He's not thinking about more than that. And in addition to these thousands of men, there's one woman. There are camp followers. We never see them, but we're told that there are camp followers. But there's also one woman. Her name is Ineah. Ineah, and she is the engineer for the army. She is their engineer. She is riding proudly with the men. Her hair is pulled back very sternly. Her eyes are so over-exaggerated as to make her quasi-ethnic, and she is snub-nosed and arrogant. Mostly her face is up like this throughout the issue. She is the engineer, and she is not to be touched. When a character tries to grab her, he is beheaded. The very imaginative sound effect we get is chop. He is beheaded by these two guys who I don't want to stress this too much, but they are pretty awkwardly racist caricatures of stereotypical Arab or Middle Eastern people. This is the profile of one of them. That is that is pretty bad. but it's only rarely that you can see them because this is all so dark. When we first see Ineah, this is what she looked like. She's staring straight ahead. Her nose is up. And when we next see her, this is what she looks like. Staring straight ahead, vaguely ethnic eyes and a facial structure, but her hair is now blonde. No one is allowed to touch her, and these two enormous guards see to that. These smirking Arab guards see to that. The prince has two sets of bodyguards. Those two brothers, and also two lions. that he commands just verbally as pets. He doesn't keep them on leashes or anything, and they don't do anything to anybody unless he tells them to. Conan doesn't care. The men grumble to him that this guy is crazy, and Conan doesn't care. He says, well, his money's good. It's a mission. You knew what you were getting into, all that sort of thing. So, quit grousing to me. But Conan is also breaking the rule that the prince has about no one touching Inea the engineer. She's not just an engineer. We're going to find that out. But for now, we will pretend that she is not the main character of this book. This actually is the Savage Sword of Inea. But that wouldn't have sold. Conan is breaking that rule by betting her. She is moderately happy about that. Moderately. I don't know what she's doing here. I think, according to the dialogue, that she's trying to pull the blinds down. I don't hang from the blinds when I try to pull them down. I don't know. Maybe this is another one of those insulting ideology sops to the man babies. Give them a little T and A, and that'll shut them up so that we can improve them, so that we can give them good lessons. And Inea tells Conan that she's here because she designed and knows how to use the ballista, which is one of the weapons that the prince is going to use to take back his city. The word is used over and over again, that she uses a ballista, that she is the mistress of the army's ballista. And it would be okay if the reader of this issue did not know what a ballista was. But the writer bloody well should know. If the writer is going to use that word, the writer should know what it is. Unless the writer just doesn't care. I'm throwing all this stuff out there, but I hate you people. I just hate you quasi-Nazis. I'm giving you what you want in order to improve you without you knowing it. Because if I so much as say to you that women are real people, you'll rebel and drag your knuckles right out of the room. This is the thing that irritates me, is the implied barrage of deeply personal insults that are behind this ideology. Personal insults directed at me. And readers exactly like me. She is having a conversation with Conan. And when these two guards show up, these two brothers, and remind him that she is off limits, she is not to be touched, Conan doesn't think it's worth a fight. She tells him, one guy's already been killed on my behalf. That's plenty. You don't need to do it. So Conan doesn't. They talk to him like he was a kitchen boy. He doesn't do anything about it. But I was reading, and I was thinking, okay, well, she's an engineer. He's betting her. She runs the ballista. Then the exiled prince takes a little detour. And he has elephants break down a balustrade, break down a big wall. They do something elephants would never do. You could never train elephants to do that, but they do it anyway. There's no training on them. They don't have riders. They don't have any kind of halting or chains or anything. What would stop them from just wandering away? I don't know. But they break down that door, and we see why the door was there in the first place. There was a monster inside. And this is where we get more technical incompetence, and here it's the artwork. I mean, all throughout here, you're getting the incompetence of whoever did, I want to say the color grading, but it's the grayscale grading on this thing that is bad. Really bad. And it's not like you wouldn't have known that before it went to press. There are all kinds of ways, all this is done digitally, there are all kinds of ways for you to check your work, to make sure that it isn't murky, to make sure that it doesn't look odd. Unfortunately, the dragon does look odd. Look at this. I don't know if you're going to be able to make it out, but this is all done on a computer program. Look at. First of all, this is all black down here, but if you were to look, the shadow here underneath the jaw is coming from a different place than the shadow here or the shadow here, and it's all shadow. This is added to this. The dragon isn't looking at anything. It's not looking at them. It's not looking at what it has in its hand, and all of it is wrong. It looks like this was stuck onto the page. And also, not for nothing, but that little wooden palisade would not have held this thing. It could jump over it, for Pete's sake. But anyway, the dragon appears, and we are told that when Conan is looking at this, suddenly all of Conan's concerns are gone, replaced with outright terror. The ordinary men in the prince's army are terrified, and so is Conan the Barbarian. He's terrified of this thing. And we get more. It throws an elephant at the men, and look at this. It's just ridiculous. We get they're firing arrows, and then this thing comes out of nowhere when they don't see it coming. And we get a panel where it's this boulder. It doesn't look like anything. And then we get this. What is this? And the elephant just splatters them all into random atoms. That's not what, none of this. It's all so bad. It's just so badly done. And we get more of this, Mad Libs artwork. You've got the photorealistic mountains. You've got the photo added dragon. It's all done on a drag and drop computer program. You've got the photo added sound effect. You've got the black on black text boxes, which are hard to read, and all of these shadows, all of this dark area. And the sound effect when the dragon roars is roar. Okay, so you get to this point, and in a Conan comic book, you know what you're thinking. Which is that Conan is going to come up with a way to deal with this thing. But no. No, the dragon bears down on Conan. And we are told Conan's fear-stricken mount takes the power to make even this choice out of the Cimmerian's hands, and so he draws a useless sword and waits for death. That's all Conan is doing. We are facing now the monster on the cover. In any Conan comic book story, you're going to have two obstacles for Conan to overcome. The sorcery part and the sword part. You're going to have a monster of some kind, and you're going to have human treachery of some kind, human violence of some kind. The whole point of a Conan story is that he overcomes those two things. Here, he is waiting for death from this CGI monster. Look at it, even the texturing is completely different. It just stands out that this is just somebody doing a computer program. And you might think, okay, aren't you being a bit of a Luddite? But I could learn to do a computer program. I can't learn to draw like De La Torre or like John Buscema. I can't learn to draw like that. But I can do a computer program. You give me a year and I'll be able to do it. And this was $7, this issue. But it turns out that Conan isn't going to die because the dragon gets a bolt in the eye and just collapses. It just collapses. That would not kill it. That would infuriate it. You would have a major problem on your hands. But instead, thump, it just falls, instantly dead. Basically, those of you who know your Marvel comics since they've been ideologically captured, basically, it's defeated with one punch. And where does the punch come from? Not Conan. Our hero, Conan the Barbarian, was sitting on his horse waiting to die. No, it comes from Inea, who has used her ballista. This is a ballista, she tells Conan. I told you it was useful. Again, you don't have to know what a ballista is, but the writer of this story bloody well should know what a ballista is. And they are not stealth weapons. You can't set one up quickly. It takes a long time to crank it into motion, and it's unlikely that you could hit a moving dragon in the eye with sufficient force to kill it instantly. That is, to put it mildly, unlikely. She's not stressed. She's not by the crank that would move this thing. She's not overseeing its operation. Instead, she's just standing there smug. See? Leg crossed and everything. I know you were ready to die. I just thought I'd easily dispatch this thing for you. Conan is infuriated because he is sure that the exiled prince, knew about the dragon. It draws his sword and approaches. But the prince has lions. The two lions that are extremely poorly drawn. They have human eyes, among many other things, and human hair. The prince has his lions, and he's sure that Conan won't attack them. Now, Conan fans will know that Conan has fought lions many times before. Not least of which in the Tower of the Elephant. So he fights these lions. This is a sample of the kind of artwork that we get. Look at... I don't know what to say. First of all, they are not at the same angle as he is. And all of a sudden, the background is completely gone. Instead, it's just them, because maybe it's a little bit harder to get the computer to do a background. Either way, he fights the lions. And one of them gets his helmet. How did your lion get there from here? It didn't. There's no way that it did. But he fights these lions and defeats them. And he's still mad at the prince. See, he's glowering. He's still mad at the prince. But the prince has those two brothers, and they are armed. The prince actually says that. Still, I will forgive you for killing my pets, but Susain and Saham, do you believe facing them is wise, especially without a weapon in your hand? Keep in mind, this is the second time that Conan has backed down to these two guys. Just two ordinary guys, just two ordinary swordsmen. But also, okay, Conan's sword is not in his hand. True. Conan's sword is in the lion at his feet. It's literally 6 inches away from him. So we just saw him impale a lion with his sword. It was in his hand. It's not pulled away from him. At the very worst, it is lodged in this lion. So it's 6 inches away from him. I'm not even talking here for the moment that Conan, without his sword, should be able to take these guys. Conan is not without his sword. And he backs down. Again, he backs down. He's infuriated, but he walks away in thin air. No ground, no gravel, no shadows, no nothing, no background of any kind. She tells him, I'm not worth dying for. As she looks like, I don't even know. She tells him she's not worth dying for, but it doesn't matter. He wasn't going to do it anyway. Because he doesn't have a sword. He's going to leave his sword in the dead lions, which are nowhere to be seen. He just walks away on a field of white. She joins him in his bed. They are lovers by this point. But before she joins him, the siege is begun on the city that the prince was going to. The prince tells Conan, well, no one would have followed me if they'd known they were headed into a dragon's lair. So I lied to them. So what? The men have seen it. They now know that their prince lied to them and was willing to have them die. They follow him anyway. The plan goes ahead. The dragon was just a diversion. It just gave Inea something to do. It gave her a little something to spice up an afternoon. Conan was sure he was going to die. And then even when he wasn't, even when she rescued him, and he managed to dispatch a couple of lions, he then backed down to the king's henchmen. 2 guys. Just 2 brothers. Then they begin the siege of the city. These things are not ballista. They are trebuchets, which were invented about 6,000-7,000 years after the time of Conan. You want to say they exist in the Hyborian Age? Okay, fine. But who looks after them? Who's the engineer in charge of them? You know perfectly well by this point that the writer of this story just doesn't effing care. He's not saying that they have separate engineers. He's saying, this is a ballista. It's ancient weapons. Who cares? Only the man babies are going to care. They're not going to... Why do I care about them? Make them whatever you want. So these are not ballistas anymore. These are trebuchets. What they're doing here, I have no idea. If you think this trebuchet can hit that city from a mile away, you're nuts. But we get Conan in his tent, talking with Inea. She gives him every idea that he has. She validates every plan that he makes. He's not capable of doing any of that on his own, and he bears his soul to her. And he decides to go to the prince and talk things out. She tells him to talk things out. Does that sound like Conan? No. Does it sound like Conan when a prince has already been okay with Conan just dying? No, it doesn't. But she convinces him that that's a good idea, and he goes to the prince's tent. There are the brothers again, and they again threaten him. Conan has to point out to them that he's not armed. And they're scowling at him the whole time as Conan enters the prince's tent. But it might as well be the prince's sewer, because there is no light at all here. Look at this crappy black and white craftsmanship. This is awful. All the detail is completely gone. And what detail there is in the dragon, and then later we'll see it in a rug on the floor, what detail there is provided by a computer, not by an artist. Conan talks with the prince and gets nowhere with him, and walks back out to the soldiers, and there is a trebuchet. A trebuchet is not like that. That is not how it would be resting, but that's okay. Who would care about this except the man babies? He decides, well, we're not going to attack the city anymore tonight. Instead, he's going to do reconnaissance. He wants to know what he's up against. So he sneaks into the city. I think he does. I can't see it. I can't see him do anything. Look at this panel. Look at that. That is a complete waste. Where is anything here? It's ridiculous. We get another animal just completely flopping over. They do this a lot in this comic. They don't die slowly. They just plop over. But what is this? I have no idea. The computer program was able to handle somber clouds against moonlight a little, but where's the rest of this? Just ridiculous. Conan goes into the city and realizes that it is ravaged by illness. Almost everyone in the city is either dead or dying of an illness. There are rats among the bones. They are Photoshop rats among Photoshop bones. But there are rats among the bones. He goes back to the camp and immediately undresses and gets into bed with Inea, who's the star of the show. Lost completely. Is that Conan's head up there? I don't know. It's lost in shadow. I have no idea. You get a hint that if this had been done correctly, if this had been scaled correctly, this would be a pretty good panel. And maybe the kind of panel that justifies the difference between Savage Sword of Conan and Conan the Barbarian. But as it is, it's botched. So you don't see that at all. Conan knows that there's something wrong in the city, and he can't talk to the prince about it. So he decides to talk to one of the two brothers. He gets one of the two brothers out in the camp alone. Now, I don't know if you can make it out, because there's no details at all here. This is a camp on an open plain. There is no geography here. There are no gullies or ravines or trees or rocks of any kind. This is an open plain. That's going to be important. He goes and meets the one brother and tries to convince him that they need to do something about the prince's plan. And at the last minute, he hears the other brother, who has managed to sneak up out of nowhere. There is nowhere for this guy to be. Nope, the trebuchet there, unguarded. Conan tells the soldiers not to use it, but it's not even guarded. It's just sitting there. But Conan is prepared for treachery. Now, we have seen he gets out of bed with Inea and goes to the prince. So he did not have time or opportunity to prepare. He did not have time to hide a sword under this thing. But he does hide the sword and is now facing these two guys. The clear implication of this story is that he is about to be killed. Conan the Barbarian, facing two brutal brothers with swords. This is easy. This is a bare warm-up for a normal Conan story. This is not something had better happen, or I am so out of my depth that I'm going to die. But this story is clearly implying that, and something does happen. Conan is saved. Again, this would be time number 2. He is saved again, and you'll never guess by who. Inea saves him, and she saves him with a stealth weapon of siege. She uses a trebuchet here. This is not a ballista. So I guess she's in control of both. She is still smug. She still has her nose up in the air. She's still handling things easily. It's very contemptuously simple. I could handle both of them, but I want you to have some activity in your own book. She snakes a noose around the neck of one of the brothers and hangs him from a trebuchet. That is not how any of this works. You cannot get a trebuchet to do this. It doesn't work like this. You bend it back and then you release it and it fires off its payload. You don't do this, whatever this is. The writer never bothered to know that. He doesn't care. He doesn't expect you to care. This is just meant for the smug, 5-foot-tall girl boss who don't need no man to save Conan again. She manages to hang one of these guys, which means that Conan only has one of them to fight. And after a battle, he manages to kill that one. And talks with her. She is once again completely relaxed. She's not tense at all. She's just, look at this. Look at the gears and wheels. And we're supposed to believe she wheeled this up to this guy privately, silently, with enough stealth to grab him by the neck. It's just so simple. It's so stupid a way to elevate her to Conan's equal or his better. And that's what the dialogue says. He says, "Cunning suits you, Inea. Your sly design worked." And she says, "Better than I expected, actually." It's not a design. There's no way for this to work. The only thing this is putting the woman on falsely equal footing with the star of the show. Conan is not the star of his book in this storyline. He has now been saved twice. By the king's engineer, by the prince's engineer. While they are chatting about these two guys that they have then killed, one of the prince's elephants goes insane. I think. I'm not 100% sure what that is. I think the text tells me that it's an elephant spearing one of the men with its tusks. Again, I don't know what these things are. No idea at all. I have no idea of the proportions here. Why does it have stork legs? Where did these men come from? There were no men all around it. Conan was meeting this guy alone. What on earth? This is just, where is the lighting coming from? Why are all the shadows all wrong? They're all from different places. This is just ineptly done. The elephant goes wild. It spears a bunch of men on its tusks. Elephants don't do that, but in a comic book we can let it do, and then it just runs away into the snow. No background, no ground, no nothing. Nothing at all. No backgrounds of any kind. The elephant goes insane. It starts spearing these men and just runs away, and that's the last we hear about it. Believe it or not, that's the last we hear about it. Conan says, I can't imagine that rampage was simple coincidence. And she says, smugly, nose in the air, you can be sure of that. But why is the elephant rampaging in that direction? Why aren't they in danger? What happens to it? Why did it happen? No idea at all. None whatsoever. All we know is that the men who weren't there a second ago are running from this elephant, and oops, there are more people here. The prince has arrived with a gigantic horde of people. Out of nowhere, without Conan being able to see it. Without Conan being able to notice. No ravines, no ground, no hills, no trees, no rocks, just people who appear and disappear out of nowhere. And the prince says, well, you've killed my 2 bodyguards, but you surely can't take all of these men, and Conan backs down. In the snow. You might get these fancy little flourishes of dirt on the border, but you don't get any detail work in the comic. Conan backs down again. And the trip continues. They go into the city. Has Conan told anybody that the city is rife with disease? Why would he go inside when he knows his prince can't be trusted? He goes anyway. No idea why. Well, they all go to see the king of the city. I think it's really hard to tell because it's all black. It's all black shadows, except for the parts that a computer has done. A rug on the floor here that is clearly a computer design, and also the point of the whole panel. Why are we seeing all of this when here is where the action is? We don't even see this guy. Or his consort. We don't even see them. They should be the content of the whole panel. This is the big reveal. This is the leader of the city and the woman by his side. That is going to be at least nominally important in the story. Instead, we get this. We get this stupid rug. Because the computer's good at that. They have a chat with this prince. We get a little reminder. She's hacking up blood. We get a little reminder that the city is rife with disease, but no more than that. Instead, Conan's ex-prince punches his brother and says, all I want is the city. I want control of the city. And he tells Conan and Inea and Conan, I should say, since she's in charge, that all he wants is the city. That, there's a huge mine of treasure underneath this city, and it's all yours if you want it. I don't want any of it. He tells them, he takes them to this ominous black door. I know that's not saying much in this comic because everything's black. But he takes them to this ominous black door. And this is actually what he says. He says, follow this back and you will see for yourself. The mine is 1 level down, accessible by ladders. You are free to take what you want. This guy has betrayed these 2 characters 3 times now. Why would they believe him? Why would they walk into a dark corridor and down a ladder just because he tells them that treasure's waiting? They don't even take him with them. They just say, okay, well, I guess if you say so, we'll do that. They go alone. They don't go with him. They go down the ladders. They get into a space in the dark there, these stupid characters, and they start stumbling onto eggs because it turns out this is a hatching nest for those monsters. And the monsters appear again out of nowhere. These things, the babies are 15 feet tall. How they can act with such stealth. Suddenly, they are everywhere. And our crew is surrounded. And these monsters start to chomp them to bits. And the reason that you know that they're chomping them to bits is because the sound effect is the word chomp. If you don't know already, but not that you can tell, what on earth is this? You can't see anything. But in case you were ever inclined to forget that the writer of this story is intentionally, pointedly mocking you, the reader, things like a sound effect of chomp will remind you that you are the butt of the joke here. You are hated by this writer. Conan and the soldiers that have gone with them, and Inea, who suddenly has a sword and is suddenly really good at it, she has told Conan that she was trained and raised as an engineer. But it turns out that's not all she can do. She's also a world-class swordswoman, better than Conan. Because they start hacking and slashing at these monsters. And she has a sword. and knows how to use it. She is suddenly incredibly formidable. And one of these creatures leaps out of the shadows, but it's still covered in shadows. Look at all the dark here. It's absolutely amateurish. One of these creatures lunges at Conan. Lunges right out of the computer program, straight at him, and we are told, leaden from battle. Conan has been fighting exactly as long as everyone else in this panel has been fighting. And it's been a couple of minutes. Leaden from battle, Conan's limbs are all that keep the beast's jaws from him. His arms tremble with fatigue. His muscles burn as the Cimmerian sees another opportunity to die a fool today. His muscles are trembling. His muscles are leaden with fatigue. Because for the last few minutes, he's been fighting these monsters. Same as Inea has, but her muscles are not leaden with fatigue. She jumps on back of this thing and kills it with one punch. With one sword strike. And is obnoxious and casual about it. What's her line? Hold a moment. I want to retrieve that sword. She can retrieve her sword from a dragon. Conan can't take his out of a lion. She saves him. For those of you who aren't keeping score at home, this is now the 4th time that she has saved Conan the Barbarian in his own comic. In the first issue of Savage Sword of Conan, Conan's sword has been anything but savage. He's barely used it. This is Inea, the Savage Sword of Inea. She saves him. Without any good reason. If she had been built up in this issue as a warrior woman, maybe, I would still be complaining because he should be the hero in his own book. But maybe it would have some grounding. It doesn't have any grounding here. This is just subverting expectations. This is just ideology. This comic book is completely ideologically captured. Because she keeps saving Conan the Barbarian with a snarky look on her face. She saves him. But in the meantime, the exiled prince is making his getaway with the woman who had been the goal of his capturing the city all along. He has these guys holding this palanquin. He is walking next to it. Why he's not in it, I don't know. He's walking next to it on, as you can see, a broad, open avenue. Nothing hidden. Nothing that could be hidden. A broad, open avenue. When he is killed by a stealth blow from whatever this is. That is not the machine that we saw her kill the dragon with, and it is certainly not a trebuchet. And it is cranked and big. She's 5 feet tall. She couldn't work the mechanics on this thing anyway, even if she had all afternoon to do it. She certainly couldn't do it by surprise. She would have had to have been setting this thing up for an hour while the ex-prince and his retinue just watches her. This is ridiculous. But it underscores something else. The last thing I will say about this horrible, horrible story. It underscores something else. What are the obstacles in this story? There are those 2 hulking brothers who are threatening at all points. We'll discount the lions. The 2 hulking brothers are threatening at all points. They threaten Conan repeatedly. The duplicitous ex-prince is a slimy worm who has put Conan's life in danger many times and not cared about it, and who has lied the whole time. And then there's the dragon, and the dragon's offspring. Those are the obstacles in the first issue of the first story of Savage Sword of Conan. Who deals with those obstacles? Inea kills the first dragon. Inea is the only thing that stops Conan from dying at the hands of those 2 brothers, and she kills one of them. Inea kills the offspring of the dragon, and Inea kills the prince. Conan doesn't do any of that. In the first issue of his own book, he doesn't do any of that. He's just standing around while Inea saves the day, over and over again, including saving his life because his arms are so tired. This is exactly what I was expecting in Titan Comics' first issue of Conan the Barbarian. The one written by Jim Zub, and that I didn't get. In that first storyline of Conan the Barbarian, Conan is himself. He is Conan. He is the star of his own book. He is more formidable. He is the hero. He is more formidable than anybody in the book. He might face challenges, but he will overcome them. It won't be that my expectations are subverted and that a tiny woman overcomes them in order to teach me that the future is female. It won't be any ideological crapola like this. Those issues of Conan the Barbarian surprised me. I was not, therefore, on sufficient guard against this. And that's what I got. I got an anthology issue that had the best things in it are prose. That's not good to say about a comic book, but the prose issues in it, the prose things in it were good, and the backup story of Solomon Kane was pretty good. The main Conan story is exactly what's wrong with comic books today. If I may run the risk of sounding like a cranky old man, they're exactly what's wrong with comic books today. This first story is both technically incompetent in every way and also ideologically driven. The point of the story is the ideology, not to tell a Conan story. That is infuriating and saddening. It's saddening to know that Heroic Signatures clearly cares a lot about Conan's legacy. They clearly do. And I think Jim Zub does too. If he didn't care about Conan, he couldn't have produced the story that we read last Wednesday. It is sad to me, therefore, to know that not everybody at Titan Comics does care about Conan, that they have ideologues on the staff. And the reason that's sad is not live and let live. Of course, I believe in live and let live. It's that I have learned from experience that if you have ideologues on the staff, eventually the whole staff will be compromised. Eventually the product you will be putting out will be ideologically compromised in order to improve the quasi-fascist crypto-Nazis who are your hated customers. You can't work with them. You can't compromise with them. You need to fire them and walk them out of the building. You need to cancel their access to your company's social media. You need to get rid of them. They need to be gone from the system. And for a little while there, I was idealistically hoping that maybe Titan Comics was not compromised, and maybe there weren't any of those ideologues who were involved. And now I know that's not true, because this is exactly what you get when you have people like that on the staff. You get a comic book story about Conan the Barbarian in which he is a thwarted loser who is saved multiple times in his own issue. So there you go. A little bit long, a little bit on the long side for a review, but I'm not going to buy a $7 comic book for a Solomon Kane backup story. I'm not going to do it. And now that I know that this is compromised, I know that at least the issues that are in the can are unsalvageable. So I will not be doing a review of issue number 2. Now, there are other reviews. You can read, you can watch other reviews, even on YouTube. There are other reviews. McNulty's Book Corral, a channel that you should know about anyway. Michael K Vaughan, of course, our expert on all things Robert E. Howard. Of course, he's going to weigh in on Savage Sword of Conan number 1. This is my response to it. It's in a little bit more detail than theirs, because this was toweringly annoying to see this. I'm glad that the whole issue wasn't a failure. But the marquee thing in it was on every level. So there you go. That is my review of Savage Sword of Conan number 1. If you see this in your comic shop and you're halfway tempted, I don't know. If you're a big Solomon Kane fan, you might want to get it. But I don't think you're going to like seeing Conan as a second-rate bit character, the bumbling Nigel Bruce Dr. Watson in his own comic book. I don't think you're going to like seeing that, much less see it so technically inept. You're going to have to figure out what's going on, because no sufficient safeguards were taken to make sure that this looked good, that the finished product would look good. When those safeguards are far more accessible now than they were 50 years ago. There was a moment when Roy Thomas was putting together the first issue of Savage Sword of Conan 50 years ago. There is a moment, trust me on this, with those old printing press processes where you are taking a leap. I think I've done everything right, but I'm not going to know what the printed product looks like until it lands on my desk. That's not true with digital projects. And no one cared. Not enough to stop this from looking the way it does. So anyway, that's my review of Savage Sword of Conan number 1. I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.